In tonight's It's the Law, we're talking about the death penalty here in Georgia, specifically a Middle Georgia case. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles announced Tuesday they're delaying the execution of Taylor County man Daniel Green, who was set to die by lethal injection tomorrow for malice murder. Attorney Jay Davis joins us now to weigh in. Good evening. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Corrine.
A lot of people like to talk about the death penalty, but the truth is we don't always really understand it. I'm going to ask you a question here that doesn't necessarily relate to Daniel, but it could be a loaded one. How does somebody get the death penalty versus, like a murder suspect, get the death penalty versus just being sentenced to life in prison?
Well, that's the question that wasn't clear back in the 70s. It created Supreme Court. It put a moratorium on death sentences across the country. Georgia was at the forefront with the case at that time in 1972, and the Supreme Court said, look, it's arbitrary. It was sent to a jury. The jury decided whether or not the person would be sentenced to death, life in prison, life in prison without the possibility of parole. So when the Supreme Court said you've got to have something better than just sending it to the jury that way, it was sent then with the guilt, whether or not they came back with guilt. And some of the juries wouldn't bring back a guilty verdict because they knew it may impose the death sentence.
Okay.
So now we do a bifurcated hearing where you determine if somebody is guilty of murder, and then you have a sentencing hearing, and you have to determine certain aggravated circumstances that make it rise to a level to be warrant of death. And among those things are whether or not money was involved. Was it for pecuniary gain? Is it somebody who's had several other convictions, capital offenses, and that type of thing? There's actually 10 on the list of things to show that it's aggravated.
It's really broken down.
They have to prove one of them beyond a reasonable doubt, and then they consider the other factors to determine whether or not that brings the death sentence.
All right, got it. Now let's talk about this case. Now, in March, the Supreme Court denied cert due to wrongfully excluding black jurors. Could this be why Daniel Green has been granted stay?
Probably not. That is why the Supreme Court took a look at it. They decided not to review the case. That's denying of the certiorari. Back in June of last year, the appeals court had decided that that was not an issue. There were 10 jurors who were excluded from the jury pool by the prosecution. Of those 10, 6 of them were black. So the defense made the argument that black is not a reason for excluding somebody. That's not a permissible reason. So the defense made the argument that could be the reason. The prosecution showed other factors besides race that went into their reasoning, and probably in the makeup pool, this was actually tried in Clayton County because Taylor County at the time was considered too hostile. Right. So that could be a normal makeup for that county.
Now, Green's execution's been delayed up to 90 days. His future's up in the air. What are lawyers going to be looking at to determine what happens to Green here, real quickly?
Well, this is where clemency comes in, and whether the parole board is able to offer him clemency. That's some freedom where he doesn't get the death penalty. And they've made this motion, so they want to consider it fully. And clemency actually gives the pardons and paroles an opportunity to step in where the jurors already finished. The other portions of the system have done their thing. So they'll look at what other offenses he committed. In this case, this offense, which was not simply this murder, but a series, but they were all wrapped up into one event. Otherwise, he has a pretty clean record, so they'll consider that. They'll consider whatever type of inmate he's been during the period he's been locked up since the 90s when he initially got locked up. They'll look at an overall thing, the family. He's apparently sent a letter to the family.
All right, Jay, I'm going to have to cut you out there. That's all the time we have. It's very interesting stuff, and of course, we'll keep checking in with you to stay updated on this case.